Welcome to the FNDN Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. Before we dive into this episode, I have some really exciting news. Startup People Summit is returning for 2026. This is an event where we bring together the sharpest minds from people professionals across the APAC region. If you want to stay in the know about programming and tickets, sign up to the waitlist by visiting startuppeoplesummit.com. There's a link in the show notes. My guest today is Adam Weber, an executive coach to CEOs, chief people officers, and other C-suite leaders. He spent a decade as a VP of sales before moving into HR, so he's seen the exec room from both sides. Today's episode, we unpack the 5 signals of great executives, what to do when the CEO is the problem, and the discipline behind senior leadership. See you in there. Adam, great to have you here, mate. I'm glad we can make this happen. Let's dive in, shall we? Let's talk a bit about what's going on for the CPO for the executive teams. I'd love to just start by getting a little bit of a lay of the land of some of the topics of importance that you're grappling with in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, first off, Matt, it's great to be here. I hope everybody that's listening does know that you and I recorded the best episode ever, but we never pressed record. But we had a blast, and so we're just recreating. It's like getting the band back together.
You know, it reminds me of what's that Jack Black song? It's like the greatest song in the world, and it's the song about the greatest song in the world. Well, this is the podcast where we're trying to recreate the greatest podcast.
There was magic that happened. We both know there was magic, and it's like, how do we refine that magic? You know?
I believe the air was sparkling. It was that good. But anyway, we didn't record it. We didn't record it.
So we're in the here and now. You know, a lot of the right now, I work with a lot of chief people officers as in my role as an executive coach, and a lot of the work is on their how they show up on the executive team in that room, right? Most of them have a deep technical competence that got them into that room. And then now is the time to start to develop new skills and new muscles. And that's a lot of the times, I think, where growth can feel more uncomfortable. Like it's comfortable to take your core expertise and keep leaning into it and keep leaning into it and keep leaning into it. But where growth a lot of times happens, is when you start to expand and grow. And so, I'm seeing a lot of that right now. I'm seeing, I think for every chief people officer that is on an executive team, there's kind of what is my role here? It's not quite as defined as the chief marketing officer or the CFO's role. And when I'm in the room, not outside of the room, I think everybody has some level of clarity of what the role is outside of the room, but inside that room, how do I show up? How do I pitch my ideas with deep conviction? How do I chime in on other departments? And really spot areas of where there's misalignment. I think that's a big job. How do I ask questions on areas that aren't my core expertise? There's all sorts of things that kind of come up. And so much imposter syndrome too. I think that's a big thing that happens in that room as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think confidence and imposter syndrome tends to be an issue I see come up a lot. How do you see, or I guess, how do you coach some of the great leaders in this space to work through it?
One of the things I do, because the story I used to just see all the time is chief people officer spots some genuine issue inside the culture, and they have an idea on how to fix it. And then they go into the executive room and it doesn't land. And they're just super frustrated because they both, one, actually saw something inside the culture that they know how to fix. And two, they can't it feels like there's values misalignment, both personally, I'm not valued here. What am I doing here? And there's this kind of do we even have the same kind of belief system of how we want work to look? There's a lot there to unpack. I would say at the base level, one thing I always do with chief people officers before the meeting is I say, like, decide in advance how you want people to experience you. Like, name it, put a word to it, you know, like, what is the presence that you want to bring? The other thing is, like, before you go in, almost always an executive knows what pushback they're going to get, but it's so deeply embedded they haven't processed it. They're just kind of like, oh, I know Marty over here as the CFO is going to like bring up this thing. It's like they feel it in their subconscious, but they don't metabolize it. And so then when it happens, they just get frustrated or they shut down. Instead of one of the things I do with them is I just go, hey, what's the pushback that you know is coming when you pitch this thing? And they share the pushback, and I'm like, all right, let's talk it out now. What are you going to say when you face this resistance? Like, let's come up with plans. And this works for board meetings too, you know, like all sorts of things like that. So, you know, those are the big ones. And then I think obviously there's just like there's the foundations, like, how does this actually, this is so simple, but man, it is missed way too often. How does this tie to the most important one or two things that are going on inside the business right now? Like, how does it tie directly to that? And if it doesn't, is it worthy of this room? And how are we going to prove and measure that it matters, that it's going to drive results? You know, those are some of the big things that we talk about.
Yeah, it's funny as you're talking about the sort of metabolizing the anticipated pushback. It made me think a little bit of like, I guess, a sales person and kind of objection handling and things like that. It reminds me of like how broad and diverse the role really is and like what it takes to be successful at that level. How else do you see the role change in that step up from, you know, the VP of people into a CPO or a head of people into that true like executive role? Like, where else do you see maybe blind spots for people, or where they maybe just need to be a little more conscious of like the change that's involved in a role like that?
Yeah. Well, I like that you brought up the VP of sales. Probably a lot of the work, because I was a VP of sales for 10 years before I got into HR. So it's like, I think that is part of my, like, I bring that into the executive room. Like, if you say no, we're going to talk out what no means to make sure we all actually mean no versus like just hearing it and going, oh, okay, cool, no problem. It's like, yeah, it's like, no, okay. So what you're saying, but if we're going this direction, we're all deciding that what is currently happening is okay. Is that what we're all agreeing to? And just kind of leaning into some of those moments of discomfort. I think there's
that can
a
be
lot
hard
of
for a people professional, right? Like, I mean, we try to smooth things over. We try to help, you know, facilitate team cohesion. So it's not always a natural thing to want to lean into that.
And like, just genuinely the nicest people on every executive team. Like, I coach all roles, and like, I will say with confidence, the chief people officer collectively is the nicest person. They're just genuine. They got into it for, yeah. They got into the work for a reason, right? But then with that, sometimes there's an over softening. And that over softening at the executive level can come across as like a lack of conviction. And so I think what the great chief people officers do, one you and I know who does this really well, Christine Song, says the hard thing out loud, says the quiet thing that everybody else is thinking and is willing to put it on the table. Like, that's a great skill that you don't maybe need until you're in the room but when you get in the room, it's a really important skill to name out loud this experience, because every executive, no matter role, has felt this moment of like, we're all smiling, it seems pleasant, we're basically all just defending our own kingdoms. We're not talking about the business as a whole. Like, we pretend like we are, but really we're just protecting our kingdoms. And there is a place for the chief people officer to lean in to that conversation and to open up a more transparent dialogue amongst other people too. It's one of the only roles where they usually have a more similar view of the business to the CEO than any other executive. So they're kind of arm in arm. Like, think of it that way. Like, hey, what are we seeing is how this machine is working together? How are these parts working together?
Yeah, you're hitting on another, like, I think like quite critical part of the role around like executive team dynamics and maybe, I guess, fostering like psychological safety? Like how are you creating the space to be able to ask those difficult questions, but also invite people to feedback and participate and things like that? What role, again, do you see like the great leaders doing in this space, whether as a CPO or broadly amongst these teams?
One of the things that comes to mind when you said that is this concept. I've got these like 5 signals that sort of are like what great leaders exhibit. And one of them is, I call it altitude. And so what you bring is, when I'm in the executive room, my altitude, like right, is really high. And so I'm looking at the business and I'm kind of up high and I'm looking out. And that is the posture that I bring to the relational dynamics, because we are all working on the business together, not just our individual functions right now. What's so tricky about that for a chief people officer is like right before they're supposed to bring this 30,000 foot altitude, they'll like get a call about some tragedy that happened that they're like, or some HR violation that got bubbled up to them. And it'll be like, hang up the phone, go into this exec room, and your altitude just rapid switch, right? And so I think having some rituals around, even if it's just like, hey, before I walk in the room or hop on Zoom, I just like take a deep breath, say the word altitude, to myself, to remind myself of the perspective that I'm bringing into this meeting as well.
Yeah, I love it. And you mentioned there's five steps to the approach.
So the 5. Okay, do you want to ask the question again, or like how should I get into it?
Yeah, all good. So you mentioned there's like 5 signals that can support taking that altitude. Talk me through that a bit more.
Yeah, what I usually assess with like an executive when I'm working with them is there's these 5 signals or 5 competencies, right, that great executives exhibit. One of them is altitude. So we are not just leading our function. We can raise up and look strategically out for a long time horizon. We can work on the business. Another's candor, like they can say hard things. We talked about that earlier. They can challenge other people's ideas. They can surface real concerns. Another's agility, that I think everybody has experienced a non-agile executive. Usually the lowest moments of my career were someone who was set in their ways, but the world had changed around them. And you're like, oh my gosh, like this is just, it's just painful. There's ownership, which is like, we set ambitious goals, but we achieve them and we take responsibility for them. We don't put all the weight on the CEO to carry. We carry the weight that's ours to carry. And then there's cohesion, right? It's like, how do I work with the rest of the team as well? And so, and am I doing my part to contribute to the collective energy of this team? So many executives, like, if they don't have that cohesion piece, it often manifests as like the asshole executive. They might have great altitude, they might have great ownership, all these things, but they don't have cohesion. And so it just creates this kind of environment that is not that pleasant to be in. So those are the big 5. Those are, when I think about like the work I do, it's usually one of those big buckets.
Yeah, I like that approach. I think they're all, super relevant. Some of the thoughts that came to mind to me as you were running through them. Like candor, obviously incredibly important. We touched on that a little bit earlier. I'm really curious how you see. I think it's one thing to come into a team that maybe has this, and your role is really around like ensuring that it stays healthy, it stays optimized and successful. What I love diving into is like the messy stuff, right? Like when you come into a team that maybe is really struggling on 3 or 4 of those signals, and it's like, do you see that role of the CPO to be the facilitator there? Like, how do they kind of be the wedge that comes in and starts to drive change there? How have you seen that work well?
Yeah. Well, I do, like, obviously we like talking about situations that are great, but like I've been at this for a long time, and like there are no great scenarios. There are only messy and super messy. Like nobody's perfect. Everybody's doing their best. And along the way, people put up defense mechanisms and create unhealthy environments. Like that is just like what the work is. And, the chief people officer, this is where I like lightly contradict myself at times, because this is the tension of the role. Like sometimes you're asked to like be an active participant, and then other times you feel like you have to like quietly coach people one-on-one yourself. Sometimes you have to plan an offsite, facilitate and lead an offsite, and participate in the same offsite that and so it does put you in this kind of like interesting role. That's what I'm a big like believer in. I think you're at its best, right? You don't have to actively do the coaching yourself. You get to play a genuine executive role like everybody else on the team. And so you can set a high bar for facilitators, but you go and have facilitators come in from the outside so you can participate. You get to play a role as well. But then what that kind of leads to at its best is the chief people officer who does lead the team in candor. I do think that is a really critical role for the chief people officer, be a support to the CEO in that way too.
And do you see, I guess again, like to spend time in this, like there's messy and there's very messy, like how are great CPOs like instigating change with either the CEO or however they're kind of leading that when they do come into an environment where they're like, oh my God, like this is so dysfunctional. This is going to really impact like our ability to be successful as an organization. It's hampering, whether it's that none of the exec team have that kind of altitude view or candor just in the thing. Like what tends to be like a strong first step that you've seen some of these CPOs or other executives take to try and instigate change?
Yeah, I know you've seen this, but like there's kind of a tale of two paths. There's the path where you and the CEO have a shared view and a shared vision. And in that path, it's, there's a lot of kind of things you can put in place. Like, hey, I think we should, have it, during our offsite, we want to surface up do an elephants conversation, right? Where we talk about the things that we're not talking about, or we create ways to kind of raise the altitude, raise the quality of conversation on this team, build the cohesion on the team. That is the easy path. The harder path is when the CEO is also the problem, right? Or is one of the main issues that leads to the problem. And I'd be curious what you think. There's not like the easiest solution, but it is also like more often than not, that is the scenario though, like at least what I've seen, and so it's not a dire situation. Like I think that's where you have to bring great data. You have to talk about impact. I would say sometimes it's like come with ideas. I coach 50% CEOs, about 25% chief people officers, 25% other executives. When I coach CEOs, the thing they said on the other side is they go, it's just too often, it's like just what's problems without solutions. It's like, if you have an issue, I want you to come with a fully baked proposal that I don't have to pick apart. Like I want it to like take the time to carry the weight so I don't have to carry it. Or bring it to me to edit something, but don't just kind of come and dump things that are bad. And most of the times you see those reactions from CEOs that cause a lot of friction and turmoil. And I will say oftentimes it's their own self-sabotage and they create a lot of issues. But a lot of times the rooted thing is like, you're bringing me something and you're basically asking me to carry it. Is probably the root of what's going on.
It's a great call. I was speaking with a CEO the other day who talked about how interesting that role is, because it's like, he's like, well, it's one of the few roles where it's like, if you're a CEO, you've come up presumably through one discipline. If we're talking about software companies, usually it's like they're an engineer or a CMO or something like that. They're not experts in your domain. And I think that's one of the things certainly I've grappled with in my role in my career, is that it's like, I think within the people team, like when you're I guess even like sort of a VP and down, you can be a lot more collaborative in terms of like problem solving within your people team. But I think you're right that like the transition that happens when you do become the CPO is that you are the master of your domain. And so you are expected to flag issues that emerge. But you're also, like you said, kind of supposed to have something that you can present, or a couple of options that you can flag as like, which way is the path forward? Because I mean, we like to talk about how lonely and hard the role of a CPO is. I'm sure it's much, much harder and lonelier as a CEO. So it can feel like, all day long you're just being kind of having problems thrown at you. And it might be nice to actually just be able to go, hey, you're kind of the expert in your space. Like, definitely flag for me when something critical is happening, but like, let's otherwise understand what some of our options and what some of our paths are here. And I think that's something that I know certainly I've grappled with is in that switch when you're dealing at the executive level versus like within the people team, is like not to be too like, here's a problem, like let's see what happens, let's talk it out, and actually coming prepared with some paths forward.
Yeah. And all executive roles are lonely. I know you mentioned like with chief people officers, but I think for the CEO, why it's so lonely is that there is a general sense that no one is being honest and no one is carrying no one is. And so it's the worst. I mean, I have seen the other side of this where they're just like, I'm trying to bring up hard issues or like a real issue. And it's just like, people aren't willing to go there. And it's probably the CEO's fault, by the way. There's probably some topics that feel like landmines that everybody's like scared to go to. Like, oh, don't go there with him. He goes, don't go there with hers. She takes it, so there's these well-worn patterns that happen, but that is part of the loneliness. And so one of the ways you can be a great chief people officer, and a great example, a client where I coach with a group of people, we coach the entire C-suite of this company. And one of the things the chief people officer does so well is that she tells the truth to the CEO, and in private, not always in the full group session, but like says the hard things out loud in a way that maybe other people don't, and like views that as part of her job. Like, hey, here's some of the dynamics that are going on. I think we need to like surface up, like I've got your back. Like I'm going to kind of make this role a little bit less lonely as well. And we're going to collaborate together on it.
Yeah, I like that. Are there approaches that you work through with some of these clients into either a framework or something like that is helpful in terms of preparing for that kind of conversation, especially if it's like the first one? Because I think part of the role of CPO as well is that it's like you have to sort of, it might feel like you're leading upwards or leading by example, but to try and have an influence on the CEO. But it's like that candor piece that you mentioned. Sometimes you kind of just have to be the first person to take the leap. And yeah, I'm sure you might get your hand bitten every now and then. That's also part of the role of being an executive. But yeah, are there ways that you've seen like CPOs work through like, okay, I've got to have this difficult conversation with the CEO. I have to be really honest about some of the issues that are happening. Here's how I'm going to step through that conversation.
For sure. I mean, a lot of conversations I have are like actually scripting the conversation with the CEO. I would say at its core, the things that always come up are lead with the headline, like don't bury the lead. As CEOs are just constantly scanning for risk. Does this deserve my attention? Does this not? And especially chief people, this happens to every executive, but I would say especially nice chief people officers, they soften and then they miss the point, like they don't deliver with poignancy what they were trying to communicate. So don't bury the lead, just say the hard thing first. The other thing too is I think, and this is for anyone in their career, but is give yourself some time to kind of take out some of the sting and try to really focus on the business. So anything personal, anything jabby, it sounds so basic, but leadership is mostly a discipline. There's very few things in leadership where I'm like, where I share it with people and they're like, oh, I've never heard that before. It's more like we just get sloppy and we stop bringing intention to the work that we do. And so then our just old habits and patterns show up. And instead it's more like, okay, so how am I going to show up? It's like, I'm going to decide the tone and I'm going to name the tone before I get in there. I'm not going to bury the lead. And if it escalates, I'm deciding how I'm going to respond. Those are like the main things, like when I'm working with people that we're like, hey, let's just talk it all out now because we know it's happening. It's going to come, it's just how it goes. It's tense environment. Business is hard. A phrase I love, Danny Myers, who is the CEO of Shake Shack, he had this quote, and I use it all the time. Business is problems. it is just a series of problems. They never go away. So it's like a mirage to think, oh, once I get through this problem, it'll be
if it was easy, everyone would do it, right?
Yeah, it's not. It's just like constant. Yeah.
The very delayed one just makes me chuckle because I feel like, I mean, there's so many times like early in my career and I had to learn this the hard way where it was like, and I think there's something to like prioritizing what you've got to work through to make sure you are kind of, you know, dealing with that big rock at the start of the conversation. But gosh, I mean, there's so many times I used to be like, we're talking through all of the agenda items, and then it's like, oh, and by the way, this like massive, terrible thing happened, and we've got 3 minutes left in the conversations to deal with it. And it just does not leave a good taste in the other person's mouth. And it's like, wait, we could have been dealing with this huge problem. Instead, we've got no time and we've dealt with all of these like little 1% issues.
100. I mean, my goodness, that feels like 10 years of my career was that. I just had, so sometimes what I'll do is like observe executive teams where I'm like, I just join their team meeting and sometimes I call timeouts, you know, to go, well, hold on, let's talk about what's really going on here. But a lot of times I just kind of observe and then give people feedback on how they showed up. And just this week I was meeting with a client and I was like, hey, it was a big topic, right? Like just think business changing, very significant topic where every exec has a different perspective. Those happen all the time, but they are intense. And I was like, can I say back what I think your point was just to make sure I understood what you were trying to represent? And they were just like, oh my, that wasn't even close. I was like, well, I wrote it down. What, you know, and I was like, so it's back to this, bury the lead. And this is someone who's worked for global brands and, you know, super successful. And it's like, still, it's that discipline of leadership. It's like, hey, if you have a strong perspective that the CEO needs to make a good decision, you cannot cloak it. You cannot make it murky. Have the courage to put it on the table and just say the thing out loud.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm curious to hear, we've talked a lot around like what, you know, how a great CPO or a great executive shows up. I'm curious for the people that are listening who are like, yeah, despite everything Matt and Adam have just covered, that sounds horrendous. You know, maybe I'm stuck anymore. But those on the line who still want to be in this, what are some of the things that you think are like important for them to start either experiencing or preparing for or getting in place for, you know, for the inevitable transition?
One thing is, so say you're on a people team and you've got like recruiting and benefits and people operation, you know, like different segments, and you have functional mastery in one of those areas. Like when you're in your leadership team meeting on the HR team level, I would right now start practicing asking questions about other functions, not like to help make sure they're thinking through strategy, right? Just like be an active participant in areas you don't have mastery over, and not in a way that you're telling them what to do, in a way that you're curious, helping them think through it. It's the muscle for you of like understanding how you can support people that you don't have expertise of their domain. Is that, I would say that's a big one. And I don't know if you experienced this too, but for me, like when I first started managing people who I didn't have function, HR was my first experience with this. I managed an HR director who was a professor of HR for a decade before she came to work for me. I was like, I know nothing about this.
Like an actual professor?
Yeah, she's a professor, and then she came and worked for me.
Okay.
And I had never done HR before. Yeah. And so I actually felt like I grew more from managing her than, you know, sales, where I had all this core expertise, because I had to kind of remove myself from trying to solve things through functional mastery. And I had to do it more through like strategic priorities, unblocking, creating consistency,
like
creating ways
leadership.
to track. Yeah, it's just like, and you actually become a better leader that way. And so I do think find ways to stretch yourself outside of like your core function, because at some point that does happen along the way. What about you? Does anything jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, your first one hit home hard for me. I mean, I still remember a time that I lost out on a VP of people role for exactly the reason that you had mentioned. I was up against another internal candidate, and really, like, fundamentally what it all came back to is that I had, you know, I had not done as good a job as that person as being present, understanding like the broader business and some of the challenges and issues that they were going through. Didn't have as strong of relationships. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of like, this again is just that funnel up from being, a specialist as a people professional or even a generalist, but fundamentally within the people function. The more senior you go, the more broad that skill set and awareness of the business needs to be. And unfortunately mine wasn't as broad as the other candidate. And yeah, it cost me a role, unfortunately. But I think that just speaks to your point, which is that you really have to, you have to be stepping out of that functional role and into the business and how you interact and work with them and how you enable and support their strategies, not just your own, to be successful in that role.
I think that's spot on. And maybe if I added like one more, it would be take a swing every now and then, like really go for it. And what I mean by that is like, you have to have some level of confidence of your value in the market. And then like, let the chips fall where they may. Like stand up for things you believe in and initiatives you want to be true and like really go for it. So often I feel like people play it so safe because they're just so scared of losing their job, which I can understand. I've always been like, save up 6 months of emergency savings and just start getting some guts and put yourself out there a little bit and like, and just trust that your career will be so much more fulfilling if you take some real swings about things that make you uniquely you, and then you'll also end up in environments where you're like actually valued, not just like a warm body taking up space.
Yeah. That your point around the personal finance piece and that giving you the confidence and the strength to step into that role could not be more true. I mean, that's something that I sort of pride myself on a little bit, I guess, is that I've always been someone who's been quite diligent in that respect. And it's the confidence it gives you to go, you know what, if tomorrow this job ends, like it would suck. Don't get me wrong. We attach a lot of our purpose and identity to our role. But I'd be okay. I've got enough there to go find another job. It's not going to be the end of the world. And then ironically, it actually helps you be a better operator. And I think the fact that you do take these swings, it feels super counterintuitive, but it's like, the more that you are a little more, thorny is the wrong word, but you're kind of in there saying like, at the end of the day, people see the direction that you're trying to move in and the goal that you have in mind and the vision that you're working towards and the kind of impact that it can have on the business. And now I appreciate that, having 6 months of savings is certainly very privileged, but the amount of like personal confidence it gives you to be able to just go, hey, like what we're doing here is wrong. I would also say like on the flip side, like I've worked for companies where I've just been like, we are fundamentally at odds with each other, like, from a values alignment perspective, all that sort of stuff. And the fact that you can kind of either just opt out entirely. I mean, I've left roles before without having other roles and it's because of this. Or, coast a little bit and find that extra role. But yeah, I think you're right that being able to like step up and like take a swing for things that are important to you and are important to the business is certainly a great way to get like on the map for a lot of executives and be a bit more well known and I think having an opinion is important, especially the more senior you get. So yeah, I think that one resonates strongly to me as well.
Yeah, and it's obviously like, I really do believe in that. And I don't think it means, being thorny, like you're saying, like there's some version of that, that's true. It's like, stand up for what you think is right. But I will say like, if you do really take a real swing, and I'm saying like you pitch something really bold and then you get pushed back and then you keep pushing. I'm like, I take 3 swing. I'm like, did you swing 3 times? Do you explain, like when you got the no, did you explain the consequence of what happens if you with apathy? That is my number one thing of like verifying everybody's actually okay with status quo, or did I just come with the wrong idea? And then I want to just verify like that the thing you're saying no to is what I was trying, that I didn't bury the lead, like that you're actually saying no to the thing I was actually trying to communicate. And let's just say all those things happen and you take your big swing and you still get a no. The reality of like being in the big seat, the CEO seat, the chief people officer seat, is that at times you have to hear a lot of different things. And then you have to sometimes say no. And so if you are the one who's pitching and you get the no after the bold swing, make sure you have the business context that you're missing as to why. Because there's something, and you may not agree with it, but there's something about the business that you are not understanding that would lead to that. And it is important that at that point, let's remove the thorns a little bit and just go, hey, I want to make sure I could articulate the business justification for saying no to this.
I think that's fair. And I think as well, so often the context in which we put forward that first swing isn't ideal. Maybe we felt like the environment, it was maybe a little more informal. And so we didn't like prepare or present or pitch it as like comprehensively as we ordinarily would something bigger. But I think you're right. Like once you come back around and go, actually, no, I do genuinely believe that. And here's maybe the context that I was missing from it initially. I think this still stacks up. It's like, let's have another crack and let's make sure that the business understood, or understands what it's turning down.
Yeah. And I think that's a super cool, like if on the fly you realize like, yeah, you thought it was more informal and then you got into it and you were like, I was not prepared enough. I think it's okay to be like, hey, I believe in this, but I'm not communicating it at my best right now. Can I take another swing, come back next week? And like, I'm going to put some data behind it. I'm going to put together something to like make sure that I'm fully, so you have full context before you say an official no.
Yeah. Love it. All right. Well, let's see if there's still people that want to take those steps and become executives. It's another thing I'm curious to pick your brain about is like, I think the evolving role of the CPO as well. Like I don't know about you, but certainly from my seat, I feel like it's a role that has changed so much over the last sort of decade. I think that the function has fundamentally. I think we've gone from being this like prominently back office, bit more compliance focused, et cetera, to now. I mean, the other day I saw Atlassian's chief people officer has taken responsibility or expanded her remit for like their entire AI, workforce transformation. And I don't know to the extent that it shows up from a product perspective, but I think the function went from like 700 people to like 3,500 people. And I mean, that's a transformation we're seeing happen in a lot of places. I know we have a mutual friend, Sarika, who is also responsible for AI transformation, but the people, that's sort of the mantle of the CPO is evolving a lot. And one of the things, again, I've grappled with, I see a lot in the community grapple with, it's like, how do you like embrace these broader remit without becoming the kind of everything function? I think sometimes it can be really easy. I know the term like department of +1 gets thrown around, things like that, where it's just like, there's not a clean fit elsewhere in the business. Let's just throw it over to the people team and let them grapple with it. How do you see great CPOs could either, evaluate and take on that responsibility or kind of maybe firm up what their function is, possibly to the exclusion of something that could have, been thrown over the fence?
What's interesting, like AI is a great example of that right now. And yeah, Sarika is a great, she's been a client of mine for a long time too. Like watching this AI transformation is a really interesting topic for chief people officers to face. The way I think of it is if it's cultural transformation, it's a great bucket. Like, I don't know if AI is actually going to live under like CPOs forever, but when we create unified alignment and standards and cultural adoption and change management, well, now all of a sudden it kind of is like, it does make logical sense, because a cohesive strategy is really important. And forever, the kind of anything that is orphaned or like unowned inside the business, like just gets kind of tossed over. I do not know the answer to this because there's part of me that's like
a little bit, right? Like it is the cultural implication. I think you're right. Like with AI, it's like, yeah, on face value, it looks like this kind of like, it's a tech thing. Why are it in the people function? But then if you really start to scratch beneath the surface, like the speed with which companies are expecting people to understand what AI is, understand how it impacts their work or could impact their work or could be embraced or be adopted, but also be like ever vigilant on the way in which it can be embraced in their roles. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like every day I wake up and there's been some new AI feature that's released and I'm just like, okay, cool. I'll throw that in the backlog of things that I need to learn about. But it's like that's fundamentally a systemic change to the way in which people were doing their role. I mean, roles were changing day by day anyway, and then AI came along and now it feels like minute by minute. But so I think that is to your point, like I think that is one lens through which to evaluate. Is it fundamentally like a culturally led initiative, I guess, in some respects?
Yeah, that's the way I think that's the lens that I at least take to it. And it's like, if you don't, it's like what's really happening with AI right now is like a company like gives everybody Copilot and then everybody actually uses Claude. And it's like, or take out the actual brands, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just this, it's a total misaligned, total chaos. Like, and some people are creating, like, I don't know, I think we talked about this in our unrecorded podcast, but like I had a friend who texted me who this company did like an AI initiative, and he was like, I think I figured out how to save 3 hours a day for like every single person in this company's like who does my role's job. Like and he's like, I don't know what to do. He's like, do I share that? Do I keep it to myself? Do I go start a business? Like, and I mean, it's complicated stuff. Like it is just total Wild West right now too. AI is in general.
What about with teams that like are taking on AI or other things, like what about when it's like, actually this probably isn't best sat with me? I know we've talked about difficult conversations a bit, but it's like, how have you seen or how would you encourage teams to think about like, hey, this really isn't my bucket. Like, let's think about where this can be supported within the business. Maybe it's a question of like prioritization. Is this just a trend thing that you saw it pop up on an article and you want someone to own it? Or like, how do you help your partner to the business to be like, actually, maybe the people function isn't the best space for this to sit?
I love that. I actually think too, like being intellectually honest with your own capabilities too, and like yourself. Because like when you're an executive, like you do need to be able to own the thing. And if you can't confidently own it, it's like you've got kind of two paths. You can either say, hey, let's bring in a consultant who does AI cultural transformation, or let's give it to somebody else, and ultimately just saying yes to expand your kingdom on topics that you either don't have the passion for or you don't have the bandwidth for, or competency. It's like, it's not, ultimately people don't usually look back when they say yes to those things and go, I'm really glad I did that.
I remember speaking to a chief people officer, and it was like at a big company. It was like start of last year. So I mean, AI was still, maybe it was the end of 2024. So like AI is still a pretty big thing. A lot of people using it. And I remember this person was like, we were talking about AI and I was talking about how I was using it. And they were like, oh, I should try this chat GPT. I was just like, I was stunned. I was like, how have you not? Firstly, I mean, kudos to you for somehow like hearing about it so relentlessly and just not having like even the curiosity to open an account. But I think in those circumstances, yeah, you're right. Like probably not the best person to lead AI workplace transformation.
That would be someone who should raise their hand. I had this is so off topic, but so you can edit it out if you want. But like, so 6 p.m. here, I know you and I, it's fun. We're on like opposite sides of the world. So our times are, you're like still having your cup of coffee or that. But I like went on a walk right before this podcast. I was like, got to wake up, it's a little end of the day. And I had this AI thought about, I had this sadness today where I was like, one of my absolute favorite aspects of like the culture work that I've done in my whole career is these deep listening tours where I go around, and I've done it both internally, like when I worked somewhere, and then also as a consultant. I'm doing it right now for a bunch of car factories where I go around and interview field workers, and you take these really complicated scenarios and then like you make sense of the data, And I was like, and that, when I like genuinely think about things I'm like the best at, I was like, that's like one of the things I'm the best at. Going around to a culture and going, what are the core values, like unearthing them. And there's some part of me today that's like just feeling a little sad, like, oh, that, synthesis of large amounts of data, which is, I'm not sure. I don't know how much more I'm going to do that. And now, not that I wouldn't do it differently, but I need to be honest that like the way that I used to do it has largely already been replaced, And I was just kind of having a moment like, I'm a little sad about that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's like, you're right. I think it'll probably amplify the human element, which ultimately is you having the conversation and being able to focus on that being a great conversation. But I think you're right that it's very likely that the notes from that will flow into an LLM to be, prioritized and whatever. I think the risk there though is like the loss of nuance. I mean, I don't know about you, but I use like everyone AI all the time. And it's like, when you read back over the notes, sometimes it's like, man, you missed the point. Yeah. And I think that's the piece that
you missed that's the thing I've been challenging myself, like on this project I'm working on is like, it's tons of data. I mean, it's like lots and lots of interviews. And then I'm like, all right, I want to make sure I give the coach's narrative, which is, so I record myself and I'm like, here's the story that I feel. I think, like, here's what I'm getting from this repetition, and so I'm trying to find that new way of doing it where I'm not totally losing it. It's just like but I also don't want to deny the fact that this thing is over here tabulating every time something comes up in a conversation. And it's interesting how different work is becoming, even in this like hybrid kind of shared way.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's something I actually talked about with a different guest, Benjamin Langner, and he talked about having this kind of list of like what not to use AI for and being like really clear and diligent around the things that, need to remain human. And it was kind of this like, I think it's very easy to like use AI for AI's sake in a lot of ways. And so you risk like dehumanizing some parts of the experience in the workplace to the detriment of, like how people show up, how they feel work, how they experience work, all those sorts of things. But I like that concept of like, sure, maybe it takes you using AI to actually come out the other side of it and go, oh gosh, that didn't feel good for me. It missed the nuance. It felt like the synthesis that it gave you didn't really capture the essence of what it was that we talked about. So actually, which like ultimately undermines the effort of what it is that you're trying to achieve, right? So I think that's going to be whether it's a skill or I don't know, something that people are going to have to develop is like not only the ability to identify ways to use AI and make sure that we're like rapidly adopting it across everywhere that merits it, but also identifying when it doesn't work or shouldn't work and equally pulling back and making sure that we're keeping the human in that part of the process.
Yeah, for sure. I saw this in like that butted right up against your world the other day where someone sent me a compensation proposal for their, like for sales compensation. And like I read it I think one of the things people do too often is they create something with AI and then don't review it themselves, don't give it a critical lens themselves and then send it to somebody else who has to critically review it. And, I was like, this felt like it lacked the expertise. It lacked the kind of this, it was more like, well, this is what AI created, but like, did we give it a critical lens on top of that, which is just like it's an interesting thing that happens right now where people are like, oh, cool, I got it done and I'm going to ship it off. And then this other person has to spend all this time editing a thing that I could have edited myself,
Yeah, this is the productivity crunch. It's kind of creating this sort of thing, isn't it? Where it's like, we're almost becoming a little too reliant on AI where, ultimately it's a reversion to the mean and we're kind of looking at it. We're like, it looks kind of good, move on to the next thing. And I get to move further up in my to-do list. I think it's a real problem affecting workplaces at the moment. And certainly from a cultural perspective, I think that's one of the things that if chief people officers are going to be handling AI workplace transformation, it's like, how do we prevent that drop in quality because we are just relying on AI too much? So anyway, one of the problems, well, I was going to say problem of the future, probably not, probably a problem of today, I would say.
A problem of today, yeah. But business is problems. Did we put a bow on this thing?
We've come full circle.
This better have been recorded. I can't create magic. We can't do this three times. We wouldn't have the magic.
Then I do say third time's a charm, but maybe let's not test the theory. Man, speaking of which, it's been awesome having you here. We've covered a whole heap of topics from showing up on the exec team to how to get on the exec team if that's still a path people want to take. If the business of problems is something they're still keen to solve. Any final parting wisdom, any final parting words, anything you'd leave chief people officers with to be more effective in their roles?
And I think we covered it. I do think for the aspiring leader, it's to your point. It's such a great privilege, though. It's a great privilege to lead people and to impact their lives. And the world needs more great leaders. It needs good people in leadership who are making the world and making work a better place. So I sure am hopeful people are willing to kind of take that leap and continue on their journey too. And It's always a privilege to meet with you. You're such a cool guy, and I'm grateful for the time.
There you go. It's official. I'm a cool guy.
It's official. It's been stamped.
Mate, thank you. I appreciate it very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and week.
Yeah, you too. See you, man.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.